All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about fake news. That's my best Trump impression, so I clearly need to work on it. That's the one impression I can't do. I can do a lot of them. I got a pretty good Arnold. Get to the chopper! Get to the chopper now! Okay, I got that one. I've got Al Pacino. Hoorah! That's my Al Pacino. Hoorah! I'm a fan of man. She's got a great ass, and you've got your head all the way up it. All right, that's Mal. All right, but today we're talking about fake news, or just the news in general, and I'll say the metamorphosis from where we were in, say, the 70s and 80s until today, and that the progression or regression, as it were. And why is it that so many people now are turning to podcasts to get information instead of traditional news sources? Is the news fake? I don't know. Well, let's find out. I am 49 years old. Well, I'm 48. I'll be 49 in the fall, which means I was born in 1976. So I've been around since pre-internet and pre-24-hour news sources. And when I was a child in the 1980s, 1970s, we effectively got our news from one of three sources, or maybe four, really. ABC, CBS, and NBC, and PBS, the PBS NewsHour. And we watched television news. Now, there's also print media. There was, but there was no internet. You know, there was something called the ARPANET, which existed, but they made a movie about it with Matthew Broderick called War Games, but only the super uber duper nerds ever used the ARPANET from their house. It was mainly used by the Department of Defense, universities, and things like that. But we got our news mostly from television and from radio. CNN was a thing in the 80s, but it really didn't have its coming out party until the first Gulf War and Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. But before that, we watched the television news in the evenings. Typically, they had morning news and the evening news, and they had, the Today Show and stuff like that. But by and large, every evening, my dad would go and turn on the TV right before dinner time and watch the evening news, and everyone had to shut the hell up. No one talked around, near the TV room when dad was watching the news. We could watch it with him, but you had to be quiet so we could hear the news. And then we would eat dinner and do our homework and stuff like that, wash our, take our baths. And during the summertime, we could stay up and watch the nighttime news, the evening news. The nighttime news, that was on usually, I want to say like at 10 o'clock. And my dad would stay up and watch that as well. And you had to watch it. There was no streaming. There was no TiVo. If you didn't watch it, you missed it. And so it was a big deal. Then, after that would be Johnny Carson and David Letterman and the nighttime talk shows. But that was how we got our news. And there were people like Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings and Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite before that these anchormen what's her name? Barbara Walters. She came out. She was also sat anchor sometimes, and she was like, broke glass ceilings for women in the news. But by and large, it was anchor men, and that read the news, and they do it very stoically, with little emotion. Ron Burgundy makes fun of that era, whatever, but that's kind of what they did. And no one ever really knew where the newsmen fell on a political issue. They showed very little emotion. There's times in the history where these newsmen would break. Famously, Walter Cronkite, when he's reporting the JFK assassination, he famously took his glasses off and became human for a moment and broke that wall down. I remember Peter Jennings after the 9/11, during the reports after the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attack, him getting emotional during one of the reports and giving an emotional reaction to somebody on his staff, I think. But by and large, there was a whole lot of stoicism and just robotic, reporting of the news. Very little emotion. You didn't know their opinion. And whenever one of those guys would go on, say, Johnny Carson, people tuned in to Johnny Carson to see what Dan Rather was really like as a person. when he's not just sitting there reporting the news stoically. Fast forward until the late 80s, right? I was like 1989. I think I was in the 8th grade when, Iraq invaded Kuwait. And we gave them a certain amount of time to get out. They didn't get out, so then we invaded. And I remember I was at a 8th grade basketball game, and they stopped the game and they announced the U.S. has invaded Iraq. Well, that was CNN's coming out party. So CNN sent in Bernard Shaw with a cameraman, and he got a hotel room in Baghdad and was able to live via satellite, which was a thing back then, to basically live stream in the olden days the war. And and he had the cameraman sit there, and we were watching the attack come in, and it was riveting. America attacking Baghdad. And America predominantly attacked government and military targets. So hotel rooms like the one Bernard Shaw was in was untouched, but they still they got underneath their bed or something like that to be safe. And that was a big deal. And so CNN came out, and all the news sources, ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, and now CNN, predominantly cast a wide net. They didn't get political. They really didn't. They weren't trying to attract Republicans or Democrats. They reported facts objectively. Now, every once in a while, if something was riveting or important, they wanted to get the scoop, and they wanted to put the information out there for the American people. So they would push a little, and if you go back to the McCarthy era with, when he was with his witch hunts of people of communism, Edward R. Murrow, pushed and got that story out there to know what was going on, and then in different eras, different times that the members of the press had to really kind of dig to reveal truth to the American people, but it's always truth, not reality. My reality may be different from your reality. Think of reality kind of like a perspective, but truth is universal and it's objective. I'm talking to you on a cell phone. That's objective truth. I am a white man. I am bald. I wear glasses. These are objective truths that we can all agree upon. And that's what they put out. And they just put out facts and information that we, the viewing public, would watch and listen to and hear. And we, each individual person, would distill it down and interpret it and find its meaning for our lives and decide on how we were going to vote and what we were going to do and how we were going to spend our money, where we were going to invest our money based on the information that was put out. And again, they weren't trying to strike to a specific demographic. So the news had to be pertinent to everybody. And they practiced something called long-form journalism that is pretty much dead nowadays. And long-form journalism was effectively the whole story. Google long-form journalism and find out what it is. PBS still claims to do long-form journalism, and they're the closest ones who I think does, in the sense that they tell the whole story and lay out all the facts, and they have an hour of news versus 30 minutes of news. But it's clear when you watch PBS NewsHour that they are pretty biased in their reporting. It's not. They may have an opposite opinion reported, and I do like their formats of their interviews, and typically their debates are much more polite, and it's easier to keep track of. They'll just ask questions back and forth and give opportunities to speak, and there's no speaking over and interrupting, which is incredibly annoying for the viewer. But they still are pretty biased, in my view. So, all right, back to this regression of the news. So, CNN gave birth to the 24-hour news cycle and the 24-hour news networks in the first Gulf War. In the years to come, now the first Gulf War didn't last very long. It was less than a year, and it was over, right? And it was resounding victory by the United States. And then we had the months and years to come of reporting from there, keeping Saddam in his little sandbox, patrolling the no-fly zones, et cetera, et cetera. But by and large, it was over. And then CNN now had all these viewers, had all these high ratings. They needed to pivot into something else to continue that going. So they started chasing stories, and really, which was kind of cool because they could really dive into the meat of a story. But for the most part, they still continued to cast a wide net, but they had competition. So all these other news networks started kind of mushrooming. Fox News, MSNBC, CNBC, so on and so forth. There's quite a few in the early days, in the early 90s. But Fox, I think, was the first one that I can remember that decided, you know what, we're not going to cast a wide net. We're just going to go after a single demographic. And they went after Republicans and conservatives. And they focused their reporting, and they put a conservative lens over what they reported. And I won't say that they reported anything fake or fraudulent, but what they would do is bias the news. And they would leave out certain facts or pieces of information or that wouldn't resonate well with the demographic they were trying to reach, which in this case was Republicans and conservatives. Or if they didn't leave it out, maybe they emphasized a Republican narrative, a conservative narrative. Now, in Fox News' defense, in the early days, they would have an opposite opinion, right? So Hannity and Combs was a popular news show at the time. It'd be a debate show between Sean Hannity and Combs. I can't remember Combs' name, but he was the Democrat. You'd have a Republican Democrat. They'd go at it. It was pretty good. It was really a popular show, and those two guys got along pretty well. But this also gave birth to the talking head, and it wasn't so much about an anchorman, an anchorwoman reporting information. It was a person reporting their opinion, reporting their viewpoint. And yeah, they would put out information during the program, but they were talking predominantly about how they viewed things and giving you their viewpoint. And it was always biased, right? Because it's their opinion. Bill O'Reilly was an early adopter of this, and he was, one of the early guys that I remember of being in that. Well, conservatives had Fox News, the liberals got MSNBC, and MSNBC came out. And for a while, that was the left and the right side of the things. And then over the years, we started seeing more news media start to trend more to the left leaning, leaving Fox as the right leaning. And they kind of started doing that and breaking out into different demographics, especially when the internet came around. So in the late 90s, the ARPANET had evolved into the internet. And the internet boom began in the late 90s, in early aughts. All these the dot-com bubble started happening with all these dot-com companies, as well as these news.com channels. And you had not Yahoo News, and you had Google, but then you also had CBSNews.com and NBCNews.com, and of course CNN, but then also just straight up strict news websites, and of course print media started going online with the WashingtonPost.com and et cetera, right? And then you had Breitbart, and you had the Daily Wire, and you had all these. And Daily Wire is relatively new, but these news, again, more biased news sources, and they continued to, rather than cast a wide net, pretty much go after political demographics or socioeconomic demographics. CNN continued, for the most part, to cast a wide net. They continued to be pretty fair and balanced, as they reported to be, but started kind of sort of skewing left, especially after Donald Trump got elected in 2016. They went hard left. And they really got into the biased news business. Now, where the term fake news comes from was actual fake news. So whether the evidence would show you that these were Russian influencers who built fake news websites and put up fake news, actual false news, news reports to sway voters. Then there was also just probably Americans, as people trying to get clicks and likes and to get attention to make money or what have you. But there was actual fraudulent fake news outlets that would put that were perfectly typeset websites, that would put stories up there that were completely made up. And this was an effort to sway voters and to just, like I said, just get clicks and likes and stuff like that. The actual news, the mainstream news, began to report, again, what I would say was biased news, where there was like 10 facts or pieces of information that supported a headline. A CNN might report the 4 to 6 that would support their narrative and that would resonate with their demographic, the left that they were trying to reach. And they would just conveniently leave out the 4 to 5 that balanced the story out. Fox News did the opposite. And it kind of continued that way. And this is what I predominantly believed until I kind of started doing a little bit of my own digging and realized, no, at a given point, the news agencies began to report actual false information. In some cases, it was an effort to just be quick to the punchline and to beat the other news sources to not get scooped. So because news happens so fast, the internet era, everyone wanted to be first, and it's more important to be first than to be right. And rather than wait and make sure and get your facts straight, they just went with a story, and they would make pivots along the way. In 2004-ish, during, I think it was the election of 2004, Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, Dan Rather reported something about George W. Bush that ended up being incorrect. And he did that. He went with the story, found out later it was incorrect. The next day he has to go out. They issued a retraction on the news. He took 5 minutes out of the news hour to apologize and report the retraction. And the next day he was fired. They made a movie about it with Robert Redford. I haven't watched the movie yet, but don't base your history on Hollywood movies. But it's maybe worth watching. I don't know. But go to from 2016 and onwards, and we would see routinely incorrect news get reported. Maybe they would update the story in the web version. They wouldn't. Maybe they would or wouldn't print a retraction. And in some cases, and eventually they stopped even doing that. I strictly remember Rachel Maddow on MSNBC reporting that if you took the COVID vaccination, you wouldn't get COVID. That's not true. I got vaxxed and boosted. So did my wife. So did my children. And all 4 of us got COVID. My children got it within 5 months of the vaccination. I got it 2 months after they did. So clearly that's not true. CNN, multiple news agencies reported that Joe Rogan took horse dewormer. And come to find out, that's not true. He took ivermectin, but he took the human version of ivermectin, not the equine version of it. He actually had Sanjay Gupta on his show, and he showed him the box of the medication he took. And Sanjay Gupta, on the show, to Sanjay's credit, said, yeah, we were wrong about that. Next day, he's on CNN, and Don Lemon doubles down. Said, well, it does have equine application, so it's not false reporting. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Just own it. Remember when Roger Clemens and Andy Pettitte both popped positive for steroids during the steroid era of baseball? And how Andy Pettitte just owned it, said, yep, I did it. I'm sorry. I needed to keep up with the Joneses, and I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Roger Clemens doubled down on the lie. Roger Clemens was persona non grata, whereas Andy Pettitte was more or less forgiven in the court of public opinion. So I would encourage those news agencies out there to stop doubling down and start being more honest in your reporting. So with this vacuum of truth and this distrust of media, and you're like, Tom, who cares? It's Joe Rogan taking ivermectin. I agree with you. Who cares? But if they're willing to lie about something small like that, and this is where dishonesty can really derail a relationship, whether it's with two people or with the American public and the news media. If they're lying about one thing, what else are they lying about? If they lied about the COVID vaccination, if they lied about the origin of the COVID virus, and they lied about Joe Rogan's horse dewormer, what else are they lying about? Well, it was also reported that police officers were killed on January the 6th. I found out a year later that that's not true either. That no police officers were killed on January the 6th. There were some of the police officers who were there who died later. One died, I think, of a brain aneurysm. But no, that was not true. And that was reported. So, and with that vacuum of truth, people started turning to podcasts. Because here you have a podcast that doesn't put out news, but puts out information. And the first podcast I remember watching at any length was the Joe Rogan podcast. It was around 2020, and he has a COVID vaccine expert. And I can remember the guy's name. I wish I could remember the guy's name. I put it out there. And I wanted to know about the COVID vaccine. Should I take it? Should I not? I was like on the fence. Like, should I get vaccinated? Should I not? And here's a guy. Joe Rogan is not a COVID expert. And he'll tell you that. But he has a COVID vaccine guy on his show, and they're asking him questions. And it was a 4-hour podcast. You get just relaxed, conversational, and get the information from the subject matter expert. And this guy had MDs and PhDs and whatever, very credentialed guy. You know, he's had politicians and leaders and thinkers, philosophers, doctors, and stand-up comedians and MMA fighters. He has this broad swath of people. I'm also a big fan of Chris Williamson's podcast, Modern Wisdom, that you can get information from. I wouldn't, but because there's the shift from the news media to podcasts is less of an indictment of us who are watching podcasts and getting our information from podcasts, and more of an indictment of the news media and where you have gone from Walter Cronkite to where you have Anderson Cooper interviewing Kellyanne Conway and rolls his eyes during the interview because he didn't agree with what she had to say. Can you imagine Peter Jennings or Dan Rather rolling their eyes in an interview with their subject, no matter who it is? No one cares about Anderson Cooper's opinion. No one cares about Don Lemon's opinion, or Bill O'Reilly's opinion, or Sean Hannity's opinion. We just want the news, the information. If you give it to us, we will watch it. All right, have a great day.